size class. It had about a dozen students in it.
Yeah.
And we would have times that were set aside for the class to be dialoguing online.
Mm-hmm.
But what I didn't realize were two things. One was, outside of those times, they think you're still going to be available. It doesn't matter that they're getting in touch with you at 1 o'clock in the morning because they're in a different time zone from where you are and so on. They want to know why you didn't return their email.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, in a physical classroom with students physically present, when you've got a disruptive student,
Mm-hmm.
you can take the pressure off by having a conversation out in the hall after class.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that online. And I had one such disruptive student.
Wow.
You know, it was just he was just closing down dialogue.
Oh.
So you know, it was a useful life lesson.
Yeah.
You know, as much of teaching is. If you teach, you learn a lot, right?
Yeah.
But these are lessons that I certainly hope to get back to this larger question about the campaign. These are lessons that I think I can put to good use. Certainly in some, and because of program development, because of majoring important candidate searches, because of committees that I chaired and so on. There are some particular skills that I can bring to the educational dialogue and debate, and I'm looking forward to doing that. But one of the issues that I'm really very concerned about with regard to education is higher education in Montana, and the fact that we are not holding on to our best and brightest.
Okay.
They are tending to go out of state for advanced degrees, sometimes for their undergraduate degrees. And hey, I mean, we've got some wonderfully talented students. Just from Ekalaka, we've had students who've gone on to both West Point and Annapolis. We've had students go to Stanford, to Grinnell, which is a marvelous little school, and also to larger state institutions. But there's something that's happening at Montana State and the University of Montana right now, which reflects a national trend in public education. And that has to do with really weakening the academic programs.
What do you mean by something happening? What is that something that's
The
weakening the
something
programs?
is closing down master's and baccalaureate programs, getting rid of the majors. They say you don't need an English major to still teach English education or English literature or journalism, because you'll still have those teachers. You don't need a history major to hope that you'll have a course on ancient Rome, because you'll still have classicists. Well, in point of fact, if you don't have an academic program in a field, those fields suffer. And we've seen that happening. It's not just happened, it's become flavor of the month or of the year or two here in Montana now, but it's been happening in Wisconsin, which was once a state-of-the-art state program. It had numerous really fine campuses, each of which had a campus specialty.
Okay.
You know, environmental studies at Stevens Point, philosophy at, I think, I'm not sure where the philosophers were. But anyway,
I don't know if they know where they're at half the time.
That is an issue. But anyway, it's an idea that's been it's being tried. It's in California, in New York, at a lot of the larger institutional frameworks, and now really arguably a much smaller framework in Montana. They're trying to do the same thing. And it weakens academic programs. And what that does is it tends to encourage, as I say, the best and the brightest students to go elsewhere.
Sure.
And they'll not simply go to school elsewhere, they'll find jobs elsewhere. We want them bringing that talent and that energy back here. If you look at the demographics, we are an aging population. I would imagine South Dakota is as well. You need the next generation to be here.
Yeah.
And even conservatives would agree, because they're going to generate the tax dollars. We got to have them paying taxes.
One thing that I saw conservatives talk about, especially in South Dakota, was more of an influence or more of a focus on STEM or community college, certificate degrees, things like that. And you had mentioned a lot of classical learning and philosophy and
Right.
things like that. Are you looking towards STEM or?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
No, I do not believe that every student needs to or should go to a 4-year academic institution. STEM and engineering and computer, IT and AI are the big
Yeah.
acronyms these days, right? We have to think about the future.
Well, SpaceX is hiring for,
Yeah.
I think they had an opening 600 some people for
Yeah.
Elon Musk's SpaceX. And meanwhile,
Yeah.
in South Dakota, they were saying, we have too many jobs, we don't have enough trained workers.
And those two things go together because the training, it's not that we have too few jobs for the workers that are available.
Yeah.
It's that we don't have workers who are trained to use the robotics that they have to use. And a generation ago, you could have said the same thing about auto mechanics. You notice then you never talk to a mechanic anymore. You're talking to a technician, and
Yeah.
The old idea that you could click and clack the car guys on PBS, and you could just spend your day working on your own car. You can't do that anymore.
Well, the under the hood of a 60s model vehicle looks a lot different than a 2018 model vehicle.
Right.
Yeah, so as technology increases, education needs to too, and so that's something you're focused on.
And some of those jobs pay very well. So that's certainly something that we need to be looking at.
Good deal. Well, and is there anything else on like rural education in Montana you'd like to touch on, or I think have we covered everything in education you'd like to?
Well, no, but
it's a long
can
conversation.
It's I think education delivery is a real issue.
Education delivery. Can you expand on?
Well, the fact that you have school districts that have 3 or 6 students, and even I don't know offhand. It's something I should find out about. But how many one-room schools are still in existence, and whether you can find teachers who are adequately trained to be working in that kind of context.
Do you have any idea how to get adequately trained teachers to rural areas, because they're hurting for them?
You gotta pay them.
You gotta pay them. Yep.
And I think you have to find a way to make it. I don't want to say make it sexy, but you have to find a way to make it look like a legitimate piece of the educational process.
Where does that pay come from if education already takes up more than half of the general budget?
That's a good question. I actually have a couple of meetings scheduled with people who are educational or honchos in the public education K through 12 system. So check back with me in a couple of weeks, and I'll know more about that.
Let us know how that goes. And one more time for anybody who's tuned in, we are interviewing live in studio Mary Stange for Montana District 29 or District 19 State Senate. Next up, did you want to talk any more about environment, economic justice? Those are your other 2 main campaign priorities.
Right. Environment is a big one, not simply because of things like the counterbalancing of clean delivery of fossil fuel as opposed to more or less impactful kinds of fuel. I think that's very important. And it's important not simply because of the dangers of environmental damage, but also because we need to figure out how to consume fuel differently, how to do without fossil fuel. So I think that's a major issue, and along with that, you have the question of environmental health.
Yeah.
Whether our environment, whether some of the things we're doing, especially in our extractive injuries, are harming us. There's quite a debate right now over coal strip, for example, in Montana.
Sure.
And that's the idea of increased particle pollution, and how might that correlate, for example, with rises in the incidence of asthma among very small children.
Okay.
Things like that. Cancer risks in various places. Libby, Montana, for example. Far outside of my district, but it's a statewide problem, and a lot of these are.
Right.
So environmental concerns need to be thought about, I think, creatively and far more broadly than we're managing to do it. When it comes to what I group under the category of economic justice, and I have to admit, part of this was the 3 E's: education, environment, economy, so that I'd have a memory peg for for mornings like this. But that covers an enormous amount of ground that I think has to do with how we figure out how we're going to serve populations that need to be served, that need our collective support and help.
Right.
We touched on this earlier with regard to what do you do if the Farm Bill somehow does come out in such a way that you lose funding for SNAP and funding for school lunch programs. Then how do you serve these populations that need to be served? If you shift from the Farm Bill to health, education, and welfare, and cuts that have been proposed nationally in healthcare delivery. I mean, right now in Carter County, we have the Dahl Memorial Association, which is it's been a very well reviewed nursing home.
Okay.
The hospital needs a lot of work to be brought up to, not simply up to date, but up to code. And right now, Carter County is trying to figure out how to pay for it. Now, if you can't make it to Carter County, to Dahl Memorial, the next place is Baker, which is a mere 36 miles up the road. But that may be too far in an emergency.
Sure.
And they're facing, the Fallon complex is facing its own funding issues. So, and if you go to, I would gather, basically every rural community has its own issues to deal with that have to do with serving their populations and dealing with underserved populations.
Right.
You know, what does the person who has no health insurance do when they need medical care?
Well, now, and that was one of your points under this, providing affordable health care for all. Is that the state and federal, is that the government's job?
I think the way it was framed by Obama, and to some extent, but not quite so well by Hillary Clinton. And there's not too much I agree with Hillary on. But I think the idea, the framing of it that I like best was Bernie Sanders. You go for a single payer program.
Okay.
And yes, that is provided by the government. But if you look at the nations in the world that have gone in the direction of single payer, government-provided health insurance, it tends to be more efficient and it tends to be cheaper.
But it seems like we can't get everyone or enough people, healthy people, involved in this to pay for it without forcing them, or like on our taxes. If you didn't sign up for some sort of health care or anything, you get a big ding on your taxes, which actually, in my circumstance, if I wouldn't have and I would have paid that penalty, I would have gotten more back. And so I would have actually came out ahead for not signing up for some sort of health care, which doesn't make any kind of good sense. But what's your, I guess, is this stuff going to be coming up in the Montana State Legislature? It's been a long morning. And, what do you kind of think you would do about that?
I would be arguing for single payer.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see that argument emerging on the national scale as well. There are other arguments that are somewhat less progressive, but I think the first thing is to start seriously contending with some of these issues and talking about them with something approximating open-mindedness.
Something approximating open-mindedness.
But that in the Montana legislature, I mean, right now that's tough. I mean, it wasn't the year before last when they seriously were debating whether female legislators could wear open-toed shoes. Whether that...
Wait, this came up?
Yes.
That was, they actually
It made the national news. I was still teaching in New York at the time, and I had to explain to my friends and colleagues who said, now, wait a minute, Mary, what's going on with the Montana legislature
They
here?
spent government dollars hanging out and talking about open-toed shoes.
Whether that conform to the dress code, because open-toed shoes might be, and you start to wonder, and I don't mean to bash any of my potential colleagues, but do these guys have foot fetishes or something? Well, why would they? And then they
Watching
also
a lot of Tarantino films right there.
They also weren't too happy about women wearing leggings in the wintertime.
Oh, okay.
And this did make national news, and as I said, colleagues of mine in New York said, oh, Mary, what's going on there? And I said, well, at least our legislature only meets every other year. You could say that that's an advantage, although I think we should go to an annual schedule.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, in New York, you could say, look, the last three majority leaders of the New York Assembly are, in jail right now, so you can't talk. Politics can be a dirty business. But I think that we have spent far too much time, and you see it. You see it on the nightly news. You see it on the kinds of things we fixate on online, and we all do it. You open up your MSN feed, and you're like, "Oh, what have Meghan and the Queen been doing today?" We're flooded with irrelevant information,
mm-hmm.
and we're not getting to where we need to be in order to talk about what we need to.
Yeah.
And it would be surprising, given the way the political terrain is right now, it would be surprising if you didn't have some very intransigent people in the Montana Senate. But I think overall we've got a system that works pretty well, and I think we could work it better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I would hope that I could contribute, and all of the other Democrats in our hopefully blue wave could contribute, because the first thing we need is to strike a little more balance than we've been able to.
Okay. Good. And I see under this you've got enact livable minimum wage legislation, guaranteeing workers' rights to collective bargaining, and again with the healthcare stuff. And this just comes with a difference on the kind of ideological spectrum of Democratic versus Republican. When you say, hey, we need some more government involvement on these issues, we need to put more government money into these things, and I feel like you're still going to have those holdouts that say, wait, we were better off without a lot of government involvement. Was that in an era before technology, before a lot of social issues? Is that a holdover, do you believe? Or is this just the direction America has been heading and needs to continue heading, in your opinion?
I'd say it's the era since Ronald Reagan. And the idea that what we need to do is get government out of the way. Mm-hmm. Let the system, free enterprise, free trade, which is not fair trade, as we know, get all that, all those regulations, we don't need them. Get government out of our lives. Now, what I find deeply ironic about that, is that these are the same people who want to tell women what they can or cannot do with their reproductive lives, or how they can or cannot educate their daughters about their reproductive lives, who want to, in the name of eliminating regulations, they actually are putting in place a capitalist system that is, it's run by Wall Street. Mm-hmm. A good example is the opioid crisis, which we need to be looking at. We need to be dealing with. This is a subject that certainly came up at that training I was at last week. And one thing you got to do is figure out how to get big pharma out of that picture.
Sure.
And it takes government to do that.
All right.
So I think there are places where you can say that it's valid to question whether there's a governmental overreach, but you also have to think about how many times you've heard people say, "Well, you can't. I want government out of my life, but I don't want them screwing with my Medicare or my Social Security." Mm-hmm. Or saying, "Well, we can afford these things now, but we have to abolish them for future generations," which is like saying, "Yeah, you hand it on to your your kids and your grandkids.
Your problem now.
Yes, yes, which is just a variation on what you see on all these big RVs that say, I'm spending my grandchildren's inheritance.
I haven't actually seen that, but I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Is there anything else you'd like the voters out there in District 19 to know about yourself, or anything else we haven't covered for you?
Oh, gee. I'm honored to be in this electoral process, and I'm looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't met my opponent yet. And I really, as I said in this little statement that you had from me, it's a way of giving back. You know, I've been very fortunate in my life and in what Montana has given me.
Sure.
And it's a way of saying thanks.
Gotcha.
But also in a way of making it better, and making some of the things that I've enjoyed with my husband more widely available.
All right. Good. Well,
and no sales tax. No sales tax.
We're going to have no sales tax. Well, we're going to wrap this up here in just a minute, but I want to let you know that is Mary Stange for District 19 in Montana. And can I say your email here? People, it doesn't look like... Do you have a website?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Well, I don't have the website is still under construction, but
yeah.
my campaign email is Mary for Montana.
Do you have dots at Mary dot for?
You can put the dots there, but they don't care.
Okay. It works either way.
Yeah,
Mary
right.
for Montana.
maryformontana@gmail.com. And that's also a way to access my Act Blue account if you want to throw a few dollars my way.
All righty. Sounds good. Well, thank you very much, Mary, for joining us today. And that video recording that we've been taking will be available on KBFS.com probably in the afternoon. Tomorrow we have 9 a.m. The Tri-State Museum and Visitor Center Director, Christy, is going to be in at 9. And we say a big thank you for coming all the way out, Mary. And we'll talk to you again, I'm sure. So
yeah, it's been great. It's been a pleasure.
Good deal. All right, thank you. And Katie, our great board operator, is going to get us out of here.
And that's it for our live interview today with Alexa Altoff and Montana Democratic candidate for District 19 State Senate, Mary Stange. Look for video of today's interview later today on KBFS.com. Now, back to the Laura Show.
Ever said this about
Now you're
how it's not according to our values to expect a child to
Thanks,
learn
Mary.
in a classroom
Well, thank
of
you.
37 kids